Hello and welcome to everyone out there in the Actual Tech Media audience. Thanks so much for joining us on this special Friday webinar event. We've got a great discussion lined up for you today. I'll be introducing you to our two expert presenters here in just a moment. But first, I should point out the topic of the event today, most importantly, and that is backup and recovery in 2023. The market and customer needs are changing. This event is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Veeam. Thank you to Veeam, of course, for supporting the event. Before I introduce you to our two expert presenters, I should first cover a few things here. Housekeeping information. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator or host on the event today. We always want these events to be educational. I know so many companies out there are just struggling to adequately protect their data from malicious attacks and ransomware and disaster. And that's the whole point of this event. We want to help you to solve your data protection needs for 2023 and beyond. The market and customer needs are changing. We know that. We want to get your feedback. We'll have a number of polls during the event. We also encourage your questions there in the questions box of the audience console, and we'll be taking your questions live at the end of the event. So keep those questions coming. We also have handouts there in the handouts tab. I want to call your attention to those. It's the Data Protection Trends 2022 report, the Ransomware Trends 2022 report, and then there is a slide right there, a PDF resource entitled Getting Started with Veeam, that'll actually bring up a PDF that has a number of QR codes with additional information. It's a great resource or takeaway that I encourage you to download from this event, and you can check out all of those resources after. At the end of the webinar today, it'll be my pleasure to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand or recorded, of course, that drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab. And then maybe to help further shake some questions loose, if you have a question on your mind, you're not quite sure if you should ask it or not, we also have our best question prize for a $50 Amazon gift card. We'll be selecting the prize winner for that after the event. Give us a chance to review all the great questions that have come in. And of course, you must meet the prize terms and conditions. All right, so with that housekeeping information out of the way, I'm excited now to bring in today's expert presenters. Welcome to Mr. Dave Russell, Vice President for Enterprise Strategy at Veeam, and Mr. Jason Werner, Global Product Vertical Marketing at Veeam. Dave and Jason, it's great to have you on. I'll hand it off to you. Take it away, Dave.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate it. We're going to launch in now to really, Jason, a whole lot of different kind of research and discussion track here. As David mentioned, we're going to try to focus on how you can close out this year, 2022, position yourself for a better recovery practice in 2023. So without further ado, Jason, we've got some research that actually backs this up, don't we?
Yeah, and that sets the stage nicely for what we're going to talk about. If you've come to the webinar wanting to learn about Veeam and see product demos and have us hard pitch Veeam, you're not going to get that. That's not this webinar. Instead, we've really, as Dave mentioned, we're going to look today at a lot of research that Veeam has done. Like a lot of companies, we do a lot of research to help us formulate our strategies and product development. Veeam's a little unique. We share that with all of you. We ask a lot of good questions that our partners and our customers and our prospects find very interesting and helpful as they start planning their year-to-year strategies. So we make all this research available for free to you. We put the URLs and the QR codes there. We're gonna pull out a lot of the talking points and data points that really point to help you progress your strategy for next year. And when I've spoken with a lot of customers, they're using this to really benchmark themselves against what the market's doing, what their peers are doing, and then set that strategy and budgetary rationalizations for the years to come. So we're going to flood you with information. It's just a sliver of what we have available out there that you can access. So shoot those QR codes, and we'll share obviously the URLs. But we thought also it would be fun to start with a little quiz ourselves and poll the audience as part of this. So the first part, we want to talk about what the current state of the market is, and that's informative on a couple of levels. Number one, we want to share where Veeam is in the marketplace, and show how the different vendors are progressing in the market. But first, I think it's a good kind of barometer to ask you what the level of attention that your organization is paying to backup and recovery in the last 12 months, and how has that changed? So this is, I guess, the question is, how is your collective Twitter, trend? Are you thinking more about it? Are you budgeting more for it? Is it part of the ongoing conversation? And this is great. We have live poll results here, as we can see the percentage changed. Not surprising, Dave. We're above the we're at the same or above line.
Yeah, and if we're broadcasting this so everyone can see it, 83% are coming back. They've slightly increased 17. Oh, now we've got, this is the beauty of real time.
Here we go.
So roughly now 17, 18% saying slightly increased or significantly increased. Over 2/3 now, close to 70 saying slightly increased. Only 15 saying about the same. So far, none have said declined, either slightly or significantly. And we're going to unpack some of the reasons that we think this is the case in upcoming research slides here.
There we
go.
Okay, so we weren't published. There we go. Now we see it. Okay. So yeah,
we settled that interesting mix.
Yeah, it was interesting. It's too bad our listeners couldn't see that dynamically change if they couldn't. But I think that's also reflective, this little polling question of what we're seeing in the market. And there are analyst groups that track spending and how the market is changing. Maybe talk us through what IDC sees in the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. Backup is something that many organizations, arguably all, have been dealing with now for decades. And yet, despite the fact it's a quote unquote mature industry, there is meaningful share shift or vendor selection that's taking place. This was just published not too long ago by IDC. They publish it every 6 months. The title is Data Replication and Protection. The way to actually read that is that data replication includes hardware-based, whether that's a purpose-built backup appliance or a primary storage array or a NAS filer. And then protection, when you see that, just read backup. And what you can see here is the top 5 vendors globally are listed. Dell Technologies listed first, not too far behind is Veeam, despite the fact that we don't offer any hardware-based activity, meaning we don't, Jason, deliver primary storage arrays, NAS filers, or purpose-built backup appliances. And then you can go down the list at number 3, 4, 5 in the market from there. The thing I think is interesting to note here, if you actually look at what's going on, Veeam's year-on-year growth is 33% higher than the market average and 40% higher than the others category. So certainly there are changes happening in market. We saw in the prior slide, there are changes happening in budget and attention, but that's being reflected overall as well. So if we now look at what's going on, maybe zoom in on some geographies, one of the key takeaways I think is important for all of our viewers to see here, Jason, is that backup is growing, at least from Veeam's vantage point, in every single region, and in fact growing the fastest in the Southern Hemisphere, the Latin America areas and the Asia Pacific, Japan areas. However, I think it's fascinating. You look at the United States, and here it's actually a North American view. US, Canada collectively represent the world's largest IT economy, and it is growing significant at double digits, meaning 11.5% approximately, off of a significant base. So again, despite the fact that this is something, a functionality, a capability that everyone's been deploying for some time, what we actually see is there's actually more activity taking place as compared to just a year ago. One of the other analyst firms is Gartner. Their Magic Quadrant is very interesting from my perspective. I think I'm the only human that's actually been involved with this particular Magic Quadrant for all 23 years of its existence, either as a vendor, the lead author, or the vendor. And it's been interesting over time, almost 2.5 decades, to see what's happened. I will tell you, not many people know this interesting tidbit, Jason, but Veeam was the first vendor to achieve the magic in the Magic Quadrant, not just this Magic Quadrant, but any storage Magic Quadrant. And that is if a vendor could actually get into the leaders quadrant, and if they could do so without having to traverse the other three quadrants, that would quote unquote be the magic, according to Gideon Gartner. So now 6 consecutive times Veeam has been a leader. We started off in visionary and just moved straight up. Third year in a row, positioned highest in ability to execute. You mentioned it right off the top, Jason, when we're going to show those research QR codes later on. Here is a download link at vee.am/MQ22, Magic Quadrant 2022. I always tell people you owe it to yourself to get informed. It's not a Veeam commercial. This is just talking about industry-wide unbiased research. Obviously, we think Veeam fares well in those kinds of reports. However, it's up to you to make that decision, and we want to offer the information that allows everyone to do so.
Yeah, and that report covers the strengths and weaknesses of all the vendors. This is definitely not a Veeam, colored report. No. This is take a look at the market and the players there.
Yeah, it's an outstanding point. All of the, I think it's 14 vendors do get a write-up on them, and they are evaluated. And to your point, they have 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses listed per each vendor to help someone refine what might be their short list, who they want to consider. I always make the point, if a vendor's a niche, that doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they have a specific focus. And conversely, if a vendor's in the leaders quadrant, the expectation is they handle more geographies, more workloads, mid-market and above to very large enterprise. However, depending on your requirements, you might have a different view. Another reason to go read the research and see what's most appropriate for your needs. If we look at things on a global mix, what's interesting, you mentioned that America, specifically North America, is very much skewed towards being very large IT economies in North America. However, all of America's, and when it comes to spending around data replication and protection, both on-premises and in the cloud, it's overwhelmingly overweighted towards large enterprise or 1,000 employees and above at 68%. Not the case in EMEA, where you mean Europe, Middle East, and Africa, where it's roughly a two-way tie at 43% enterprise, 44% SMB, and the rest is mid-market or commercial. And APJ is somewhere in the middle. All the more reason why a product that can handle globally not only a variety of workloads, Jason, I always like to say that can handle the needs of a scaled up or easier to consume, more of a mid-market solution as well. And ideally, of course, being able to grow upwards as the business expands without having to do lift and shift.
Yeah, that scale up and out. Yeah. Okay. So that's a great kind of snapshot of where the industry is from a big numbers perspective. Now we want to share, really drill down into where things are moving within that market. So we've got a second question for you. Let's see if we can go back. Oh, we can do it. Sorry, I apologize. And I hope I just didn't screw up.
Nope, we're good.
There we go. Now we can see it dynamically. Do we need to go one more? There we go. The next question we've got is, what's the most common type of issue that has caused you to recover data or prompted you to recover data? That's really, in essence, what we spend a lot of time talking to our customers and partners and prospects about. Those are the use cases that we really want to focus on. So just kind of looking at that shape here, very interesting or not, that while cybersecurity still is top of mind, it's disasters come in all shapes and sizes, and cybersecurity issues usually are the big ones, but interesting, the most common are often the human errors. And I think that's reflective, and we'll kind of overlay that here in the next slide. And this is something that we track on a year-to-year basis in our research, and there we can see the results. we didn't ask the exact same question to you, our audience, as we do in some of our reports, but I want to share with you the feedback we get on what is causing real world outages. And we're here because outages happen. Dave, I think, you and I were talking earlier about the average downtime cost for an enterprise is over $80,000 per hour. So, we're good enough now. We track that on an hourly, minute, transactional basis. And so the conversation still is, surprisingly, if we look at all the causes for real world outages. I'm going to break this down in two ways. Number one, the easy way to read this, the light green line is check all that apply. The darker green line, the shorter lines, are tell us which is the most common cause of an outage. But when you break that down, if you look at it, I'm isolating kind of that mid-tier. These are issues we've been dealing with year to year. We've budgeted decade over decade to address these problems, and they haven't gone away. The architecture, the modernization of our systems has changed, but we still are concerned and are having problems with the core of keeping the making of the sausages up and running. And that's a big part of what we're concerned about. But if you look at the new players here in the last couple of years, cybersecurity as is identified as the single most common cause of outages. And then reflecting of our poll here with our audience, the accidental deletion, that speaks to that human error. So I think we do have a good representation on the call, as well as what we saw in our research. Let me go back there, Dave. Interesting. How has that shifted in the last couple of years, and as you have tracked this?
Yeah, cyber's been on the climb up from when someone had to isolate what was the most impactful. It's been the highest the last few years. However, to your point on the left-hand side, just looking at all the things that can go wrong, everything that we used to worry about is still in play, meaning despite things like redundant power supplies, higher componentry with the lower mean time between failure, higher mean time between failure, still hasn't solved all the issues. We still have networking concerns. We still have outages related to storage or applications, etc. So this is actually the punchline of why do we care about backup in 2023 going forward? It's because all of the things that we were worried about failing in the past still do fail. However, man-made events, being bad human at cyber or accidental human, mistaken human at number 2 there, that all adds up to high frequency. And speaking of high frequency, Jason, if you look at those longer lines and you see a lot of them are in the high 40s, low 50s to mid 50s%, what that really means is in a 12-month period, multiple things unexpectedly took a server or a server farm down. So we're experiencing multiple outages per year for a variety of different root causes.
Yep. And I think, to my point earlier, as we modernize, as architecture changes, people adopt the cloud and decide how they're using cloud strategically, and SaaS and other shifts in IT. The message is clear, right? This is going to be a problem that's going to plague us, and we'll need solutions going forward to address them. Maybe that's maybe a good transition to talk about the need to modernize your backup as you adopt these new architectures and technologies to meet business needs. And we'll throw our question 3 out here. Think about the last time you made a major investment in backup and recovery. What were the key drivers? Now, we're going to actually identify one here as to what was the leading reason for investing in backup and recovery. And of course, this is probably leading to some research we've done, Dave, as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll open that poll up and make sure we're getting the results. All right, maybe we've got a sticky point on the. There we go. There's the poll. Okay, responses are coming in now. We've simplified these into some big buckets, and maybe that's a little leading. as I've mentioned, because we're going to show you some things here in just a second. So it looks like overwhelmingly, we got a little movement here, complexity, capability. It's like a three-way tie, and cost not showing up as much. That's interesting.
Interesting. It's exactly a three-way tie. And truth be told, this about 15 years ago, I started doing some research when I was at Gartner about why people actually switched, not why they threatened to switch backup vendors, but why they actually switched. And for the last number of years, over a decade, it's been some mix of these C's, and with the cloud being now increasingly more and more into the mix as well. So interesting that we see cloud actually percolating up to the top, but complexity, or obviously the desire to reduce that, and then compatibility coming down lower. You know, Jason, I always like to say cost at some point matters. However, it doesn't matter if you can't get what you need. You know, it could be even free. If it doesn't meet your objectives, then it's not that entertaining. However, the converse certainly is true. If the ideal solution for you is really unobtainable, that's going to be problematic as well. But speaking of problematic, we have some interesting research from my perspective, where if we asked two simple questions, which we've been asking now for about 6 years, we collectively refer to this as a reality gap. So the first question is around availability. The first question asks people, do you have a gap between speed, how fast you can recover an application, versus how fast the business needs or expects it to be brought back online? A little bit concerning here, Jason. Again, this is not Veeam making this announcement or proclamation. This is not Veeam customers. This is the world's largest ever IT or backup availability survey, asking 4,300 people in 28 different countries, do you have a problem with time? How speedy you can bring back backup? 47% say strongly agree. 43% say they agree. So right off the bat, Jason, we've got 90% of the industry's largest ever research, independent research, saying that they have a problem. 7% disagree. 2% saying strongly disagree. That other 1% didn't know or they were neutral. But 90% said, I have a problem with the time. Now, the other component is the protection gap. Do you have a gap between how frequently you capture the data versus how much data you can afford to lose? Same concepts in terms of the light green there is strongly agree. The kind of turquoise is agree. 89% are saying that they think that they do have a problem according to how much data they might lose. 11% saying that they don't think they're going to have a problem. When you add this up collectively, that's essentially a failing grade across the board. If 10% say they don't have an availability issue, or 9%, and then 10% saying they don't have a protection issue, this is actually leading into what Veeam's been focusing on. And these are the challenges that we're seeing here. We've asked the same question now for a number of years. Almost 3,400 respondents. What are your challenges? Check all that apply in those longer bars, and we stack rank this by what was the most important to you. And at one hand, if you look at what percolated up to the top from a singularity perspective, improving your recovery points, improving your recovery time, SLAs, or your ability to meet those, we just saw on the previous chart why that might be the case, because people are self-reporting that they have a problem with time, they have a problem with the amount of data they're going to lose, but also it all begins with backup. You can't restore that which you have not backed up. Also, it could be a problem in terms of the backups didn't complete in time, so maybe that process had to be stopped and then restarted at a later point in time. And then in other cases here, coming at number 2 from a single most important reason was the ability to improve the reliability or success of backups. Interestingly enough, on the global survey, we saw some cost components like changing CapEx, OpEx models, or improving the return on investment, total cost of ownership, down to reducing software hardware costs. But I think what we saw from the people voting today is skewed towards the first and second response. as well as you can kind of see in the middle here, 8% globally said the most important thing was to move from on-premises to a cloud-based model. If we think a little bit about how Veeam decomposes that, a lot of times what we're thinking about is then, whoops, let's see if this pops up. On my end, it's not. There we go. So there's a data capture or protection, the backup side, and there's the restore side. Like I mentioned, and you need both. You can't recover that which you have not protected. So Veeam's really trying to look at, and I encourage you, whether you're evaluating Veeam or any other solution, look for something that can capture data in a variety of different ways. Our particular platform has what we call a 4-in-1 solution where we can combine into a single product the ability to do backup, software-based replication, continuous-based data protection, as well as integration and management of storage-based snapshots. But then Jason, it's about introducing new ways to get that data back faster. 12 years ago now, Veeam pioneered instant recovery, and we've been optimizing it ever since. Obviously, a goal in this kind of a situation is to get your data back quickly. In a disaster recovery environment, be sure you can get back multiple machines or a data center back faster. But there are actually even non-DR, non-cyber reasons where getting a fresh copy of your data brought back online for application development, such as DevOps or patch testing, as just but some examples, can be very, very helpful. And if we actually think about then what that could look like, the idea of a solution that could handle a decrease in cost, obviously a decrease in complexity, help you meet your service level agreements, meaning reduce the time it takes to bring data back, and then reduce the amount of data you're going to lose. And of course, not lock you into some prescribed bit of infrastructure. So that software-defined model offering the best recovery point objectives, and then leverage instant recovery for the best recovery time objectives is really what we're leaning towards.
David,
but unfortunately, we've gone.
I was going to say maybe a final point on that. We opened up with showing how the data protection, the spend in data protection, has continued to grow. I think the big takeaway there is people are now understanding that data protection strategy must be lockstep with with their modernization and their advancement of their business solutions. I think for a while we were in a kind of a lag scenario where what we have is good enough, and I think generally people have come to the conclusion and have tied their investment into data protection very closely with their modernization of their IT infrastructure and business solutions.
Yeah, it's a good point. Our colleague Jason Buffington likes to say, if you're going to modernize production, you need to modernize protection. And certainly in the last couple of years of the pandemic, many of us have accelerated our SaaS-based or otherwise cloud-based activities and some of our digital transformation initiatives. So it's important to make sure that the availability of practice has kept up. But speaking of challenges and not keeping up.
Speaking of challenges.
Yes. So, Jason, you almost cannot have a conversation without getting into a conversation around cyber security, cyber threats. And we've done some research in that area as well. Now, the first thing that kind of pops to mind from the simple question in orange was, how many times did your organization suffer a ransomware attack in the last 12 months or 1 year? The first thing that jumps out is the one in the unique color, Jason, that 24% said none. Our quick caveat on that doesn't necessarily mean that a multinational organization truly did not get hit. It could be that one of the many 3,400 people responding just did not have visibility into what went on with another business unit or another geographical location. Well, 24% is not great because that obviously means 76% did get hit. Don't even take that as a 100% view that 3 out of 4 got hit, but 1 out of 4 did not. And I will actually share that we're already getting in early research data on this exact report that shows these numbers are getting worse, not getting any better. And once we finalize that data, we'll certainly be refreshing the research. But Jason, I like to point out, if you look at the next highest two bars, it's actually that organizations got hit multiple times per year, 2 times,
Yes.
3 times. And of course, if you go further to the right, the story gets worse, doesn't it?
Yeah, and again, I think the general understanding of those on the call is this continues to be a problem, and the expectation is that curve shifts to the right next year, and probably for the next year as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But speaking of ransomware, because obviously it got its name because the hope is by the bad actors that you do pay the ransom. But paying the ransom, as we found, Jason, doesn't necessarily mean that everything went perfectly. This is from our ransomware research report, where 1,000 organizations around the globe, not Veeam customers, these were just industry specific customers, and we asked them, but you had to have been hit. And if you got hit, please tell us some specifics about what you experienced and how you unwound from that experience. 52%, roughly half, said that they were able to recover the data, but they paid the ransom. That's not the perfect state.
That's the interesting approach. And unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, the challenge there is the belief that if you pay the bad actors, that will lead to a better outcome. That's not always the case. And here, even though 52% said yes, and I could get the data back, if you really peel that back to your point, Jason, that doesn't mean everything was perfect the next day. It really could mean that several weeks or several months actually led to then unwinding that, understanding how to best use and implement that decryption key, verifying data along the way. Who knows when you actually did get the decryption key back from the bad actor? One of the things we like to point out is that the encryption typically happens quite silently for a period of weeks or months. The decryption, once you get the key, and that's up to the bad actors to decide when they're going to issue the key, that happens typically on a more serialized basis. In other words, you don't have 1,000 servers that are suddenly running decrypt in parallel. You usually take a subset of those, and then you want to verify that as you go. So along with what I was saying, just because you got the data back after paying the ransom doesn't mean that you got the data back instantly, going back to our availability gap and our production issue. But now the story gets worse in my mind. If you see, the 24% said we paid the ransom, but we did not get the data back. So insult to injury, you had the outage, you even paid, but you couldn't get the data. Of course, the area where we want everyone to be is in that 19%. We did not pay the ransom because we didn't have to. We did get the data back. And at Veeam, that's what we're focused on, trying to maximize, get this from an industry average of 19% to something much, much higher. I always do like to point out, Jason, that 5% looks so small, but if you think about it, this is 1,000 organizations, and 5% means 1 out of 20 organizations got hit, got attacked, but no ransom was asked for. So either there was a breakdown in the bad actor corresponding for the ransom, or this was actually a matter of, I like to say, arson, not extortion. It was just a chaos event trying to do brand or some other business harm. But anyway, you look at this, only 19%, less than 1 out of 5, saying, in this case, less than 2 or 190 per organizations out of 1,000 saying they could get the data without paying the ransom are just not the odds that we want.
No, and I think this will be an interesting chart to watch over the years. I think, early on when we were a bit naive, we all bought into the business model that, hey, if cyber criminals are very interested in helping you get the data back, because if they don't have the reputation and track record of giving your data back, you'll never pay them again, right? That's radically shifted, and this reflects another interesting, or doesn't reflect something I want to point out. This is just the straight, yes, no, we weren't able to get the data back. It doesn't quantify the importance of that data or the value of that data, right? So attacks happen at many levels, when you start thinking about that 5%, or that 24% that yes, they paid and couldn't get the data back, you start overlaying what the value of that data is, and that becomes a much more meaningful number. This doesn't measure the impact of that.
Yeah, great point. If we think a little bit about what Veeam brings to the table, we mentioned earlier in the backup modernization section, there is a backup component and then there's a recovery or restoration component. Certainly not exhaustively, but just listing 3 of our top capabilities on the backup side. Having the ability to provide immutability in a variety of different ways. Again, infrastructure agnostic, not trying to prescribe specific hardware, but provide immutability through an ecosystem of different types of hardware infrastructure, and whether that's object storage, specialized primary systems, purpose-built deduplication appliances, being able to offer verification of the backups so that you know that the backup is good, that it has the data you need at the point you take the backup. So if there's any problems, you still have the production copy available. You can go get another good copy of your data. But being able to do that without having to do manual inspection, manual testing, or worse yet, discovering that during the recovery phase. And then what we call the 32110 rule. Many of us are familiar with 321, 3 or more copies of your data, 2 or more different types of media, one of which is off-site. Still best practice. However, we've added in the last year and a half some extensions onto that. We think at least 1 copy ought to be mutable, such that it can't be compromised, and that it has 0 errors, meaning we've already done some verification, ideally automated verification on that to ensure recovery. On the restore side, being not only being able to instantly recover, but recover at scale. Ransomware typically does get noticed at scale. Being able to do what we call secure restore, where you can update the malware solution of your choice. The anti-malware definitions, the new virus definitions can be downloaded and run during the restoration process, such that you can have confidence that you're not reintroducing any day 0 threats into your production environment. Veeam can automate that process for you, and we can also certainly pause and let you inspect manually or using other forensic tools of your choice if you want to do further investigation, interrogation before you bring that back online. And then the ability to do that at broader scale from an automated or orchestrated perspective. We want to say oftentimes, DR, we see the need for something more broad-based, especially if the whole organization's getting hit, the whole data center is getting hit. Ransomware is a disaster. However, ransomware is unique compared to many other traditional DR events in that you're unwinding from it at the point you could still well be under attack. But the ability to automate some of this, to start the process so you're not relying on manual activity, we think is really key. Again, being able to do that without any prescriptive sort of solution on what kind of hardware you're going to use. But Jason, let's switch now to our third topic around the cloud.
And at this point, I do want to point out each of these sections are based on research reports that Veeam has made available publicly. And I think cloud is probably the most interesting, and it's also the most dynamic area of backup and recovery and data protection. I think over the last few years we've seen radical shifts in what people expected the cloud's role to be in data protection, and as people have had a couple of years to bake their solutions, those perspectives are changing, and we're going to highlight some of those, and maybe this can spur some good questions for our follow-up as to what people are doing within their cloud strategy for data protection.
Yeah, great point. If we think about cloud in its totality, first off, there is no one cloud. There's no singular notion of cloud, meaning there's software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, utilizing cloud as a destination or target. But here, if we just look at primary workloads, meaning production, interesting thing that we just published a couple of weeks ago in our Cloud Protection Trends Report. Again, unbiased survey research. It's not Veeam customers. No one knew Veeam was asking these questions. the first bit of, I'll call it, Jason, myth busting that we want to do is that bursting to the cloud, particularly in these pandemic years, most recently, was all lift and shift. What we see here on the orange is almost a third of the workloads were actually born in the cloud.
Yeah, and that's that shift of mentality and investment. And we've talked, previously about how modernization has changed the approach, and obviously this sets up, the need for data protection that is focused specifically on the cloud. But there's other dynamics that come into play when you talk about infrastructure in the cloud, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's interesting is nothing went away, meaning on-prem physical, on-prem virtual at 70% being involved in a lift and shift. However, almost a third being involved in born new. But the flip side of that, when we ask a very simple question, did you bring any workload back? This doesn't mean a percentage of all of your workloads, but did you bring a workload back from the cloud, back on premises? 12% said no. Then you can see the other bars here, 40 to 49% said yes, but yes for a variety of reasons. Jason, the one that I like to lock in on is the highest one at 49%. Yes, they brought data back from the cloud, or they're repatriated back to the data center. However, that was always their plan. That wasn't sticker shock in terms of running at scale and discovering economies of scale didn't factor out like they thought they would. They maybe intended to develop, burst their QA activity in the cloud, and then come back and rehost that, deliver as business as usual for them.
Yeah, I think we saw, based on some other research, we didn't include it here, but really that investment of on-prem, cloud, hybrid cloud, that's kind of stabilized, hasn't it? Maybe there's a little bonus question or insight you can provide us, Dave. If we chart where workloads have been in the last 3 years versus where they're going to be in the future, how do you overlay that with this view?
Yeah, good point. What we're really seeing is it's a matter of different organizations experience different requirements over time. One of the things I like to point out is that, say, March 2020, it was a reasonable response to say you were surprised by the pandemic, surprised by a massive shift to work from home, to burst to cloud much more rapidly or accelerate your digital transformation activities. We don't get that luxury now as we end 2022, and we definitely won't have that luxury as we enter 2023. So that idea of fluidity, and we'll show you a graphical example of that in a couple of slides, becomes really important, that data is less likely to be static as compared to what we've experienced in the past.
Yeah, I think people, I think rightly so, went in with gusto to the cloud and adopted cloud strategies. And we're taking more of a balanced approach going forward.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's just switch
no
to
other
one
place
more.
have we seen this more than Microsoft.
Right.
365.
Arguably, M365 is the poster child for cloud-based workloads, certainly the poster child for software as a service-based workloads. And here we've asked a pretty simple question from our cloud protection trends. One thing's unique about that bit of research is that we had multiple different personas or data center people that we would ask questions of. Here, this is a response based on the darker green, or the bar at the top, was from the software as a service-based administrators, if there were some. And then the lighter green bar was the traditional backup administrator. You could see in a lot of cases they agree. However, there are some differences that start to creep up as you go down the list. But interesting, Jason, that the concerns are not radically dissimilar from on-prem data. The top-ranked issue about why you might want to be backing up and protecting M365 outside of the natively inborn tools was to prepare against a cyber attack. So even SaaS is still a threat vector for attack. And then I'll say somewhat closely related, coming in number 2, was around compliance or regulatory requirements, meaning the need to ensure protection and availability of data over an extended period of time.
Yeah, and maybe just some color here as well. Just stepping back, 3 years ago, you and I were having conversations. I remember it was at a Microsoft conference. We actually put up the license agreement for Azure, and I think we showed the equivalent for other public clouds and other SaaS applications. Nowhere in those service level agreements did it ever say that the company providing the infrastructure or the application was responsible for your backup. I think people now have evolved and they've understood as they've modernized, again, adopting these, that backup will always fall upon them and their responsibility.
Yeah, and not to in any way, say that the SaaS providers or M365 in this case are unique in that regard. I actually looked earlier this week at the latest AWS agreement for infrastructure as a service. This has been pretty much the same verbiage for almost 9 years now. They slightly change it, but to your point, Jason, they make it very clear, no warranty around data availability, data corruption, or data loss is implied nor guaranteed. So in other words, it's still your data. You're still responsible for it. The guarantee is around infrastructure availability, continuity of the resources, not necessarily integrity of your data.
It sounded there for a second like you might have been quoting a license agreement verbatim.
I only paraphrased.
You might have read a couple of them.
Yeah, only paraphrased slightly because there's actually even more legalese around that, but it all nets out to they're not going to be financially liable for the cost of the data. What you will definitely get is a reduction on your next bill for services. However, that's in no way going to necessarily get your data back.
Yeah, and one of the most recent conversations I had with a customer was on the tail end of a call that we had with their partner. The partner dropped, and we were talking about just the approach and working with the partner. And I thought it was very insightful that the customer just flat out said, "Listen, I can have all the service level agreements I want, with a vendor, with a service provider. Bottom line is, it's my company's business, productivity. It's my job, right? I can pursue any legal recourse I want based on not meeting agreement or not getting my data back. But ultimately, it falls on me." And specifically, we talked a lot about the personal implications of making sure that as Office 365 is deployed and used, in this case, it was worldwide, that the accountability fell back to that one person. It didn't matter what the partner said or what Microsoft said. The bottom line is the buck stopped with him, and he was very concerned about that.
Yep, makes total sense. And we did mention bidirectionality of data, and I always like to tell people this slide is meant to be a bit semi-exhaustive in terms of different major clouds, including on-premises and also different major workloads. But the real takeaway around this is the bidirectionality, meaning being able to develop either in a hyperscaler or on-prem and then move that workload into production to another location, or perhaps going cross-cloud from AWS to Azure or any other combination that you might imagine. And of course, even for situations which you might not fully anticipate today, being able to change, having the data fluidity, cloud mobility to bring that to wherever you need to in the future becomes really important. And to be able to do that from a singular platform, to be able to do that without having not only not infrastructure lock-in on premises, but not specific cloud lock-in on the target.
Yep. Maybe you can share a little bit, projecting. Our promise here wasn't too hard of a pitch on Veeam, but I think the platform, you talk about a platform that can handle the breadth of an infrastructure today. Maybe a good way to wrap up, Dave, or a good way to wrap up was to talk about the Veeam platform just a second to show the inclusivity and the breadth of what we can do with that in mind, that you've got to have a platform that can move data from on-prem to the cloud, through the cloud, and back on-prem if needed.
Yeah, and I would say this is true, or I would challenge people, even if you're not looking at Veeam specifically, consider this for any solution that you are evaluating. So the breadth of workload and the ability then from a depth perspective to handle that workload with the kinds of capabilities, features that you need, I think becomes important. But also being able to move data from one location, one cloud or on-prem back and forth, as we illustrated in the previous slide, is important. The other thing, though, that I increasingly see is an organization might say that, well, we are 3 years into a 5-year enterprise license agreement with one provider for on-prem. However, we have a Microsoft 365 exposure today, or we have a cloud exposure today. We haven't specifically mentioned Kubernetes. I kind of buried it in the prior chart and in this chart. But we have an increasing need to realize we have stateful activity after all. A bit of myth busting there. Kubernetes is not entirely stateless. Even the cloud native CNCF data shows that as well from their most recent KubeCons. So this idea of, can you deploy a platform that can protect specific workloads that, if you so chose to, could expand over time to handle more and more of your critical data? Because as we saw in that desire to reduce complexity, if you could have a powerful tool that could manage more holistically, that might offer real benefits. However, we don't want the tool to necessarily prescribe either the outcome, the infrastructure is required, or the cloud-specific platform that you must be hosted on.
Yep, good stuff. I think that's a great comment, that to be able to look at the breadth of what you're doing, and people choose to deploy data protection, universally, globally, or as you say, project based as they create a new initiative. And that swings us back. We're running close to the end. We do want to save some time for Q&A. And maybe that's a good transition back to our original offer to our listeners, that Veeam has invested heavily in understanding trends within the data protection space, from a cloud perspective, what's happening with ransomware, and we want to make this available to you so that you make great informed decisions as well. And I would just encourage you to use the research. Take a look at it. You want to have an interesting conversation, share these slides that we've used on this webinar to drive conversations and help develop your strategy within your teams and up the chain. Well, let's leave this up so people can look at those URLs or screenshot it as needed. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, and one of them, as you've been talking. Actually, why don't we look at a couple of questions?
Absolutely, yeah. We got a lot of great questions coming in. If you have a question about the discussion and the topics today, or if you have a question just about Veeam in general, now's the time to get your question in. I also want to point out, don't forget about the QR codes that are on the screen right there, and the Data Protection Trends Report and the Ransomware Trends Report. The links to those are right there in the Handouts tab. Actually, this whole slide is there in the Handouts tab, so you can download that and check it out after the event. First question I want to pose here comes from Sachem in the audience, who's asking, what are the typical needs that you're seeing of the customers, that you talk to, or maybe some of the respondees to these polls that you've done here at Veeam? Dave, do you want to take that?
Yeah, what I think is really interesting, and this is not a Veeam specific comment, meaning we've done research where we've also had the ability to cut by company size, meaning SMB, mid-sized business, large enterprise. We can cut by country or overall regions. We can cut by industry verticals. And the commonality is amazingly consistent across all of that in terms of desire to reduce complexity, better meet SLAs, better fend off cyber threats. The fact that all of the infrastructure things that were concerning to us in the past did not go away. For most of us, the cloud is not going to zero. In fact, when we've got other research, when we looked at what are you doing today from an implementation and deployment perspective and what you intend to do in the future, it's stabilizing out on average to close to 50-50 at 48% in 2 years on-prem, 52% in the cloud. So the good news, if you will, and maybe one of the reasons why Veeam now has 450,000 customers globally, is that We try to come out with an approach that can scale up as well as scale down, but try to meet the needs to collect more data more rapidly and then to bring that back more rapidly as well. That's what I say with what most customers are looking for.
Absolutely. Like, Jason said, that backup administrator there who said, the potential monetary refunds from my cloud provider don't really matter that much to me because it's my job to get this data back rapidly and have the data available all the time. So like you said, it really doesn't matter the size of the company or where they are. It's their job to keep that data up and running and make sure it's available at all times. Jack is asking, what about the data that you're restoring? Can Veeam help to eliminate the ransomware impacted files or help you to decide somehow which files to restore?
It all comes back to ransomware, doesn't it, Dave?
Yeah, it's no surprise that came up high because ransomware is most typically a crime of opportunity, meaning someone's hitting IP ranges versus a targeted business, although there clearly are state-sponsored events and issues, bad actors going after corporations. But many of us are going to be subject to this. Short answer is on that secure restore notion, literally just a checkbox to implement secure restore and then a radio button to decide or tell Veeam, what should we do? Should we automatically have your updated malware solution remove anything that it uncovers when we're going through a restoration process? Or do you want to stop and just cancel the activity entirely? Or do you want to stop and keep this data lab, this fenced off copy of your data that's not production capable of being networked into or out from, available so you can further inspect that? So can it work automatically? Absolutely. Can you also add some human component with the ability to use additional tools or administrative inspection or combination of all of that? You can do that as well.
Dave, I'd add on the back of that comment, and I know we're running out of time here, but I think that question brings up, a larger issue that you'll find some of this data in the ransomware trends report, is the amount of preparation organizations have put into thwarting and restoring from a ransomware attack. It's still surprising how infrequently organizations perform a simulated attack and do run through their operations for recovery. And time again, when I've worked with customers, that has been probably the biggest factor in the success of our customers specifically, recovering and being ready and just having the confidence to address ransomware when it happens. I like to say, you want to go to the board with the approved plan of action, not ask them to approve a plan of action when that happens. And the fact that that people are still worried about how to do it is very telling about the state of readiness within the market in general.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Well, I know we're nearing end of time. David, do you want to take us through who our winners might be?
Absolutely. Yeah. The winner of our Amazon $300 gift card, this is going out to Courtney Myers from Alabama. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you and we'll review all the questions that have come in after the event and contact our best question prize winner. Let's see, with just 1 minute left, Jason, any news on the upcoming 2023 report?
I wonder if that was going to come up. Yes, we will soon have. Well, a lot of the data that we have in the existing data protection trends report does project into next year. We are going to refresh that report. Look for that to be available very soon, first of the year.
Exciting, awesome. And then Dave, what about the new version of Veeam, Veeam 12?
Yeah, version 12, the biggest release in Veeam's history, is in beta now. We're doing final QA quality assurance on that, pretty much close to the same time frame as the data protection trends report in January, somewhere around that early first half of the first quarter of the year. We're going to start developing our release candidate very, very soon for that and be able to make that generally available globally very soon.
Awesome. All right. Well, we've reached the top of the hour. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Jason and Dave, it's been great learning from you today. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you to Veeam for supporting the event today. I encourage everyone to check out the handouts tab there, use those QR codes for additional information. We'll see you next time and have a great day. Bye-bye.